If truth is universal, why does every attempt to possess it seem to generate conflict rather than clarity? This question exposes a tension at the heart of modern intellectual life. In everyday thinking, truth is treated as something that can be defined conclusively, claimed as correct, and defended as personal or collective property. Religious doctrines, political ideologies, scientific paradigms, and even personal opinions are often held as if they were stable objects that can be owned, protected, and enforced. Yet history and lived experience repeatedly show a contradiction. The more aggressively truth is claimed, the more division, rigidity, and psychological stress emerge. Disagreements escalate into identity conflicts. Dialogue turns into defense. Certainty hardens into intolerance. Rather than producing understanding, possession of truth often produces fragmentation. This suggests that the problem is not the absence of truth, nor is it that humans are incapable of knowing anything meaningful. The deeper issue lies in the assumption that truth is an object, something that can belong to a single perspective. This tension is not merely philosophical. It is cognitive, psychological, and deeply tied to how modern identities are formed and maintained. Modern, psychological life operates under a strong pressure for stability. Humans experience anxiety when beliefs feel unstable, when meanings appear provisional, and when identity lacks fixed certainty. In psychological terms, this is closely related to what researchers call the need for cognitive closure, a preference for definite answers, and an aversion to ambiguity. Uncertainty is experienced not as a neutral condition, but as a threat. This pressure intensifies when beliefs fuse with identity. In identity fusion, ideas are no longer held as hypotheses or models, but as extensions of the self. To question the belief feels like questioning the person. Confirmation bias then reinforces this structure by filtering information in ways that protect already owned conclusions. The social consequences are well documented. Ideological polarization increases. Moral positions become absolutist. Emotional reactivity escalates when beliefs are challenged. In such conditions, truth stops functioning as a means of understanding reality and becomes a defensive structure, a psychological shelter that stabilizes the ego. The core problem, then, is not disagreement itself. It is the transformation of truth into symbolic property tied to self-preservation. Classical metaphysics addressed this dynamic long before modern psychology named it. Few thinkers analyzed it as rigorously as Ibn Arabi. Ibn Arabi is often mischaracterized as a mystical poet speaking in obscurities. In reality, he was a systematic metaphysician deeply concerned with knowledge, perception, and the limits of human cognition. His work engages directly with how truth is known, not merely how it is celebrated. His central epistemological premise is precise: truth, which he refers to as al-haq, is real and singular. There is no suggestion that reality itself is fragmented or relativistic. However, human understanding of truth is necessarily multiple. This multiplicity does not arise from truth changing, but from the conditions through which truth is accessed. Human perception is shaped by perspective, cognitive capacity, cultural context, and psychological state. As a result, no individual standpoint can exhaust what is real. This distinction is crucial. Truth itself is not divided. Human access to truth is conditioned from this framework. Several implications follow. Conflicting truths can coexist without implying that reality is incoherent. Certainty, when absolutized, does not produce wisdom. Instead, It increases ego rigidity by mistaking partial access for total comprehension. One of Ibn Arabi's most foundational insights is that truth is not an object. It is a relation between reality and the knower. Treating truth as a thing to be owned misunderstands its nature. A useful analogy is perception of light. Light itself does not change, but it appears differently depending on the lens through which it passes. The variation lies in the medium, not the source. In this sense, truth manifests differently through different structures of consciousness. The critical implication is that owning truth confuses perception with reality and interpretation with essence. What is grasped is taken to be the whole. Modern cognitive science supports this view. Perception is not a passive recording of external facts. It is an active construction. The brain continuously models reality rather than mirroring it directly. Neuroscience shows that what we experience as the world is shaped by predictive processes, prior expectations, and attentional filters. Consider a simple real-world example. Two people witness the same event. Each produces a coherent account, yet their interpretations differ based on memory, emotional state, and background assumptions. Neither account is pure invention, but neither exhausts the event itself. In this light, truth's refusal to be owned is not denial. It is protection against reduction. A common misunderstanding arises at this point. If many perspectives exist, does that mean no truth exists at all? Ibn Arabi's answer is unequivocal. No. Multiplicity refers to manifestation, not contradiction. Different perspectives express the same reality without negating its unity. An analogy from mathematics is helpful. A single constant can be represented through different equations depending on the problem being solved. The expressions vary, but the underlying value does not. Similarly, truth is singular in essence, but plural in expression. From a psychological standpoint, mature cognition is defined not by rigid certainty, but by tolerance for ambiguity. It allows for provisional understanding and non-final conclusions without collapsing into confusion. Developmental psychology consistently shows that higher cognitive stages involve the ability to hold multiple models simultaneously. Physics offers a parallel. Light behaves as both wave and particle depending on experimental conditions. These models appear contradictory, yet each describes the same phenomenon from a different angle. Ownership fails here because it collapses complexity into exclusivity. Truth resists possession because possession requires simplification beyond what reality allows. Why, then, is the desire to own truth so persistent? Ibn Arabi locates the answer in ego stabilization. Beliefs serve important psychological functions. They provide predictability, a sense of control, and coherence of identity. In uncertain environments, these functions are adaptive. Problems arise when truth becomes identity. When beliefs are fused with the self, questioning them feels like a personal attack. The nervous system responds defensively. Modern research on identity protective cognition shows that people unconsciously reject information that threatens core beliefs, even when evidence is strong. This defensive reaction often disrupts emotional regulation. Stress responses activate, reasoning narrows, and dialogue becomes impossible. Ibn Arabi's insight cuts through this pattern. Truth cannot belong to the ego, because the ego itself is a contingent construct. It is shaped, limited, and constantly changing. Attempts to own truth therefore produce rigidity rather than wisdom. They stabilize identity at the cost of understanding. In this sense, certainty becomes a psychological compensation, not an epistemic achievement. At a deeper level, there is a logical necessity behind truth's resistance to ownership. Finite cognition cannot contain infinite reality. This is not a mystical claim, but a structural one. The knower is limited by biological, cognitive, and temporal constraints. Truth, as reality itself, is not. A common misconception must be addressed here. Unknowable does not mean unknowable. Ibn Arabi does not argue that humans are barred from truth. He argues that knowing does not occur through possession. It occurs through participation, alignment, and responsiveness. In cognitive terms, scientific models approximate reality. They are useful, predictive, and corrigible, but no model replaces what it describes. Confusing the model for the reality leads to dogmatism. Ibn Arabi's framework anticipates this insight by centuries. Truth refuses ownership to prevent idolatry of concepts. When ideas are mistaken for reality itself, thinking becomes closed. When ideas are recognized as relational access points, thinking remains open and adaptive, translated into modern terms. Ibn Arabi's teaching supports intellectual humility as a form of cognitive strength. This does not mean abandoning convictions or suspending judgment indefinitely. It means holding beliefs without identity fusion. Psychologically, this posture reduces defensiveness and improves emotional regulation. Individuals who can observe their beliefs as mental constructs rather than self-definitions show greater openness to learning and lower stress responses. Metacognition, the ability to reflect on one's own thinking, plays a central role here. A simple epistemic practice follows, framing beliefs, as this is how truth appears to me under these conditions. This shift preserves commitment while allowing revision. Neuroscientific studies associate flexible belief systems with cognitive resilience and adaptability. Socially, the implications are significant. Dialogue replaces debate. Inquiry replaces defense. Disagreement becomes informative rather than threatening. Truth functions as a shared orientation toward reality, not a weapon of identity. The central takeaway is clear. Truth is not absent. It is inexhaustible. What fails is not reality, but the attempt to confine it within a single cognitive frame. Truth does not refuse humans. It refuses confinement. From Ibn Arabi's perspective, wisdom is not measured by how firmly truth is held, but by how responsively one remains aligned with it as understanding evolves. The strongest minds are not those that cling most tightly to certainty. They are those capable of remaining receptive without dissolving into confusion. In a world increasingly defined by polarization and identity-driven certainty, this insight is not merely philosophical. It is practical, psychological, and urgently relevant.